Halo guys, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Welcome! We meet again guys. This week we meet twice. Yeah, of course we so glad to see you all.
We all from group 3 will present about with me Ivana Stitia and my partner Ades Kurnia.
So, don't skip the video.
Happy watching!
So, the first step material that we want to discuss is about debt financing. So, debt or financial liabilities refers to funds that a company has explicitly borrowed from various providers of capital. The company may borrow directly from investors by issuing securities such as bonds, such as borrowing is called public debt. The company may also borrow from financial institutions and such as banks in the form of loans. Such borrowing is called private debt. And then debt always has explicit borrowing costs, typically through payment of interest. And then this is why financial liabilities are also called interest-bearing liabilities, which distinguish them from operating liabilities such as account payables, which in most cases do not have explicitly contracted interest tied to the borrowing. Still discussed about debt financing, so the next we want to discuss about accounting for debt. So here we talk about the effective interest rate. So the effective interest rate is the rate that the market assigns to the bond at the time of its issuance. This rate determines the present value of the bond at the time of issuance. And next, which equals the cash proceeds that the company receives from the bond issue. And next, we talk about debt-related disclosure. Companies are required to report details regarding their long-term and short-term debt in notes to the financial statement. In addition to explaining the amount recognized on the balance sheet, the note disclosure provides other usefulness information. And next, we discuss about analyzing debt financing. Here, we talk in 4 topics. First topic is about amortized cost versus face value. Debt is typically reported on the balance sheet at amortized cost. This can differ from amount due at face value. And then, second is fair value accounting, reflects the present value of debt. And third, we talk about future debt retirement. It is important for an analysis to carefully examine the future debt payment schedule. And the last is unutilized credit lines. All the available credit lines are in the form of short-term working capital finance. Next, protection. There are 3 ways in which lenders protect themselves. First, security. Security refers to assets that are set aside during dissolution to specifically satisfy a particular claim. And then covenant. Covenant can be either affirmative or negative. Affirmative covenant specify action that management needs to take to keep the debt in good standing, while negative covenant limit management behaviors that might be harmful to the lender. And then seniority. Seniority refers to the order in which different parties will be paid when a company's business is dissolved. And to continue, we talk about analyzing protection. However, understanding their implications, especially those relating to covenants, can also be important for equity analysis. First, senior debt is less risky than junior debt because it gets paid first during company dissolution. And then secured debt is less risky because there are explicit assets or the collateral that transfer to the holders of the secured debt during company dissolution. And then, paradoxically, secured debt typically carries higher interest rates than unsecured debt, suggesting that it's more risky. Then, covenants tend to act as early warning mechanism for lenders, instruction for use. And the last is, not only should an analyst keep track of actual covenant violations, but he or she must also estimate covenant slack or margin of safety, which is a measure of how close a company is to violating its covenants. And next, the second sub-material about leases. So, a lease is a contractual agreement between a lessor owner and a lessee user. So, we want to discuss about accounting and reporting for leases. Lease classification and reporting. A lessee, or the party leasing the asset, classifies and accounts for a lease as a capital lease if at its inception the lease meets any of four criteria. The first criteria is the lease transfer ownership of the property to the lessee by the end of the lease term. Next is the lease contains an option to purchase the property at the bargain price. Then, the lease term is 75% or more of the estimated economic life of the property. Next is the present value of the minimum lease payment at the beginning of the lease term is 90% or more of the fair value of the lease property. And next, we discuss about lease disclosure. Accounting rules require a company with capital leases to report both lease assets and lease liabilities on the balance sheet. Moreover, all companies must disclose future lease commitment for both their capital and non-cancelable operating leases. These disclosures are useful for analysis purposes. And next, we discuss about analyzing leases. Impact of operating lease. These impacts on the financial statement are summarized as follows. First is operating leases understate liabilities by keeping lease financing off the balance sheet. Second, operating leases understate assets. Third, operating leases delay recognition of expenses in comparison to capital leases. Next, operating leases understate current liabilities by keeping the current portion of the principal payment off the balance sheet. And the last is operating leases include interest with the lease rental or an operation expense. And next is converting operating leases to capital leases. To convert operating leases to capital leases, we need to estimate the present value of operating lease liability. The process begins with an estimate of the interest rate that we will use to discount the projected lease payment. And determining the interest rate on operating lease is challenging.
We talk about contingencies. Contingencies are potential gains or losses whose resolution depends on one or more future events. Loss contingencies are potential claims on a company's resources and are known as contingent liabilities. Contingent liabilities can arise from litigation, threat of expropriation, collectability of receivable, claims arising from product warranties or defect, guarantees of performance, tax assessment, self-insured risk, and catastrophic losses of property. A losses contingency must meet two conditions before a company records it as loss. First, it must be probable that an asset will be impaired or a liability incurred, and the second condition is the amount of loss must be reasonable estimate. Fourth is off-balance sheet finance, or we can say in Indonesia pendanaan di luar neraca. Off-balance sheet finance is the unrecording of certain financing obligations. The company places this transaction as an investment in equity and doesn't consolidate in the company's financial statements. Thus, the funding is not included in the obligation. For example, of this design are purchase agreements and put agreements. So one way to fund property factories and ask outsiders to acquire it. The company agrees to use this asset and provide sufficient funds to pay off debts. Examples of this, like I said before, is purchase agreements and put agreements, where a company agrees to purchase from a specified amount of goods through a processing facility. Shareholders' equity. As we know, shareholders' equity is the very common financing activities. Shareholders' equity refers to funding by the owners, or we can say shareholders, of the company. The analysis of equity should be considered the standard measurement and reporting of shareholder equity. Accounts in shareholder equity generally do not influence the determination of earnings of company, so they do not have much influence of earnings analysis. So the analysis of capital shares, first, the information that is more relevant to analysis is the composition of the capital account and applicable restrictions. The composition of equity is important because it can affect the residual right or to ordinary shares, as well as the rights, risk, and return for equity investors. As we know, in shareholders' equity, there are two kinds of the stock. First is common stock and preference stock. As well as stock, we have retained earning for the shareholders and company. That's all for our video. We are sorry for our mistake.
Thank you for watching.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Have a nice day.